The hospital was unusually quiet that evening. The soft hum of machines, the occasional footsteps in the hallway, and the low murmur of nurses at the reception were the only sounds breaking the silence. Sanaa sat on the edge of the hospital bed, her hands tightly gripping her 3-year-old son, Denial. His tiny fingers clung to her shirt as he rested his head on her shoulder, his breathing slow but warm. He had been running a fever since last night, and the doctor had admitted him for observation. It was supposed to be a routine checkup, nothing serious. At least, that's what she had told herself. Her husband, Ahmed, paced near the window, checking his phone every few seconds. He had stepped outside for a call earlier, talking to a relative who was supposed to bring Denial's favorite blanket from home. "The fever's coming down, right?" he asked, his voice laced with exhaustion. Sanaa nodded but didn't speak. She had barely slept, afraid to close her eyes even for a moment. Denial had always been an active child, full of energy, always giggling and running around. But now he was quiet, too quiet. She kissed his forehead gently, whispering, "Mama is right here." A nurse walked in, her kind smile reassuring. "Mrs. Sanaa, I need to check Denial's vitals," she said softly. Sanaa hesitated but finally stood up, carefully laying her son back on the bed. The moment she let go, Denial whimpered, his small hands reaching for her. "Just a minute, sweetheart," she murmured, stroking his hair before stepping aside. The nurse checked his temperature and pulse, then noted something in her chart. "His fever is going down." "That's a good sign," she said. "You both should get some rest." Ahmed sighed in relief, rubbing his face. "I think I'll get some tea from the cafeteria. Do you want anything?" Sanaa shook her head. She just wanted this night to be over. Ahmed kissed Denial's forehead before stepping out. Sanaa sat back down, holding her son's hand, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She didn't even realize when her eyelids started to close. Just a few minutes, she told herself. Just a few minutes of rest. When she woke up, the room was silent. The kind of silence that makes your heart stop. She blinked, adjusting to the dim light. Her hands instinctively reached for Denial, but the bed was empty. Her heart slammed against her chest. She stood up so fast that the chair scraped against the floor. "Denial." Her voice shook as she scanned the room. Maybe he had slipped off the bed. Maybe he was playing under the table. But he wasn't there. The small blanket was crumpled on the bed, the pillow still warm. But her son was gone. Panic rushed through her veins as she ran to the door, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Denial," she called out, louder this time, stepping into the hallway. Nurses turned to look at her, confusion on their faces. My son is missing," she cried, her voice cracking. A nurse immediately walked over. "Calm down, ma'am. Are you sure he didn't wander off? He was right here. I was holding him. I just closed my eyes for a second," Sanaa's voice wavered. The nurse's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "We'll check the security cameras," she assured her. Sanaa's heart pounded as more hospital staff gathered. Where could a 3-year-old go in a hospital in the middle of the night? Had someone taken him? Was he safe? And then, just as they were about to check the security footage, something happened that made everyone's blood run cold. Sanaa's breath hitched as the nurse hurried away to call security. The walls of the hospital suddenly felt too close, the air too thick. Her vision blurred as she stumbled back into the room, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Denial was just here, in her arms. She needed to call Ahmed. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone, but before she could dial, a voice came from behind her. "Ma'am, we're locking down the floor. No one leaves until we find your son." It was a security guard, his uniform slightly wrinkled, but his expression serious. Sanaa barely nodded, her lips dry. "Just find him," she whispered. She turned back toward the small hospital bed, her fingers brushing against the blanket. It still smelled like him, like the baby lotion she always used after his bath, like home. She squeezed the fabric, trying to steady herself, but her mind kept spinning. Could he have walked out on his own? No. Denial was weak from the fever. And even if he had somehow gotten off the bed, she would have heard him. He always called for her, always reached for her hand. He wouldn't just disappear. A nurse rushed in, her face pale. We checked the hallways. He's not there. Sanaa's stomach twisted. That didn't make sense. He was 3. He couldn't have gone far. Just then, Ahmed appeared at the doorway, a cup of tea still in his hand. His brows furrowed as he looked at the crowd in their room. What's going on? Sanaa turned to him, her voice breaking. Ahmed. Denial is missing. The cup fell from his hand, shattering on the floor. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Ahmed was by her side, gripping her arms. What do you mean missing? How can he be missing? I don't know. I just closed my eyes for a minute, and when I woke up, he was gone, Sanaa sobbed. Ahmed turned to the security guard. Did you check the cameras? We're working on it, sir. But the hospital has several floors. If someone took him, they might have already. Sanaa covered her ears. Oh, don't say that. Don't say someone took him. Ahmed ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. He looked at the nurse. Who else came into this room after I left? The nurse shook her head. It's me. I checked his vitals and then left. That was about 10 minutes before she woke up. Ahmed's eyes darkened. And in those 10 minutes, my son disappeared. Silence. Sanaa pressed a hand to her chest, struggling to breathe. We need to find him. Right now. The security guard's radio crackled. Sir, we checked the stairwell and both exits. No sign of the child. Ahmed clenched his fists. Then check again. The guard gave a sharp nod and left. Sanaa turned in circles, her mind clouded with panic. She felt like she was losing control. Every second that passed made it worse. She needed to do something. She rushed out of the room, her bare feet cold against the hospital floor. Denial, she screamed down the hallway. Nurses turned startled. Some patients peered from their rooms. Ma'am, please, a staff member tried to calm her, but she kept moving. Denial. Ahmed caught up to her, grabbing her wrist. Sanaa, stop. We're going to find him, but we need to think. How can I think when my baby is gone? She sobbed, gripping his shirt. What if something? Don't, Ahmed whispered. His voice was rough, but his hands were gentle as they held her. We are not giving up. Do you hear me? Sanaa nodded weakly, her body trembling. A doctor approached them. Mr. and Mrs. Ahmed, I understand this is terrifying, but we have a full team looking for him. We need to stay calm. How can I be calm? Sanaa whispered, staring at him. The doctor sighed. I want to ask. Do you think someone might have taken him? Any family disputes? Anyone who would want to? No, Ahmed cut in. We don't have enemies. We're just here for his treatment. The doctor hesitated. And, has anything strange happened since you arrived? Sanaa blinked. Strange. The doctor nodded. Anything unusual? Maybe someone watching you. A patient acting odd. Sanaa started to shake her head, but then she stopped. There was something. Last night, after Ahmed had fallen asleep on the chair, she had stepped out of the room for a moment to get some water. And while she was at the dispenser, she had noticed an old woman sitting in a wheelchair near the elevator. Her clothes had been clean, but her hair was wild, her thin fingers twisting into the blanket on her lap. She had been mumbling something under her breath, rocking slightly. Sanaa had felt a chill but had ignored it. As she had turned to leave, the old woman had suddenly grabbed her wrist. Her grip had been strong, too strong for someone her age. Be careful, dear, she had whispered, her eyes dark and unreadable. Sanaa had pulled away, heart pounding. I have to go. The woman had smiled then. Slow, eerie smile. Hold your son close. Not everything is as it seems. Sanaa had hurried back to the room, brushing it off as the ramblings of an old patient. But now, standing in the hospital hallway with her son missing, those words echoed in her mind. Not everything is as it seems. She gripped Ahmed's arm. There was a woman. Last night. She said something strange. Ahmed frowned. What woman? Sana swallowed hard. An old lady in a wheelchair. Near the elevator. The doctor's expression changed. He glanced at the nurse beside him. Who was on duty last night? The nurse hesitated. Was sir. But we don't have any elderly female patients on this floor. Sana's skin prickled. That's not possible. Saw her. She was there. The doctor turned to the security guard. Check the footage from last night. Near the elevator. The guard nodded and left. Sana felt cold, her heartbeat uneven. She knew what she had seen. But if the hospital had no such patient, then who was that woman? And why did she seem to know something about denial? The silence in the hallway felt unbearable. Sana and Ahmed stood together, their faces pale, their eyes locked on the door, waiting for any sign of progress. The flickering fluorescent lights above cast long, shadowy reflections on the floor, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Sana's hands trembled as she gripped the edges of her coat. Every minute felt like an eternity, and yet the more time passed, the more impossible it seemed that denial was somewhere in the hospital. She thought back to the moment when she had first seen the old woman. The memory was so vivid, so strange. The way the woman had looked at her, as though she already knew something was wrong. Sana had dismissed it at the time, but now she couldn't ignore the unease that settled in her chest. Was there a connection between that woman and Denial's disappearance? Ahmed paced in circles, his steps quick and sharp, his mind racing just as fast as his feet. He kept checking his watch, then glancing toward the security office down the hall. Why isn't anyone telling us anything? He muttered, his voice tight with frustration. Sana couldn't answer him. The fear inside her was too thick to put into words. Her son, her precious little boy, was gone, and nothing made sense. As they waited, a nurse walked up to them, her face clouded with concern. Mr. and Mrs. Ahmed, there's something you need to know. Sana turned toward her, her heart pounding. What is it? Have you found him? The nurse hesitated, glancing down the hallway as though unsure whether to say more. Finally she spoke. We checked the footage from the cameras near the elevators, and we found something strange. Sana's breath caught in her throat. What did you find? The nurse glanced around again, then lowered her voice. The footage shows your son. But he's not alone. Sana's eyes widened. What do you mean? Who is with him? The nurse swallowed. The footage is grainy, but we're certain. A figure was walking beside him in the hallway. It's hard to make out who it is, but we've ruled out all the hospital staff. This person doesn't belong here. Sana's knees nearly buckled. She grabbed the wall for support. How is that possible? He was just in his room. How did someone get past the nurse's station and walk off with him? Ahmed's jaw clenched. Is the person in the footage anyone we recognize? The nurse shook her head. Oh, but there's one more thing. She lowered her voice even further. The person in the video seems to be leading your son toward the emergency exit. But the footage cuts off before they reach it. Sana felt a cold chill run through her. The emergency exit. The only way out of the hospital that wasn't heavily monitored. Her thoughts spun wildly. Could someone be trying to take denial? Was this all part of some larger, more sinister plan? Before she could speak, a sharp voice interrupted from behind her. Ahmed, Sana, what's going on? It was Imran, Ahmed's older brother, stepping into the hallway. He had driven up from a nearby city after hearing about Denial's illness, and now, seeing the panic in his brother's eyes, he understood something was terribly wrong. Sana's eyes welled with tears as she collapsed into her brother-in-law's arms. He's gone. My son is gone and I don't know where he is. He was just here. How could this happen? Imran held her tightly, his expression hardening with determination. We'll find him, Sana. We will. But right now we need to focus. What's going on with the footage? What did they say? Sanaa looked at Ahmed, who was staring at the security guard across the hall. The guard was watching something intently on a screen in the security office. His face pale. "The footage shows someone walking with denial," Ahmed explained. "We need to figure out who it is." Imran nodded. "Let's go talk to the security guard. Maybe there's something more we can see. A clearer image." They rushed to the security office. The guard, a young man with a tired look on his face, stood up as they entered. He motioned to the screen in front of him. "This is where we lost the footage. The person with a child was walking this way, toward the back of the building. And then the camera just flickers. We can't get a clear shot past that." Sanaa stared at the screen, her heart sinking. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. "Can you track the hospital's access points?" Imran asked urgently. If they were trying to leave the building, maybe there's something on the door cameras. The guard hesitated but nodded. "We're doing that now. It's a long shot, but we've got to try." As the guard typed rapidly on his keyboard, a sudden thought struck Sanaa. The old woman. Could she have been involved? Had she known something was about to happen? Her words haunted her now, echoing in her mind. "Hold your son close. Not everything is as it seems." She blinked rapidly, trying to push the thought aside. It couldn't be. But something told her she wasn't just dealing with a missing child. This felt bigger, somehow darker, more twisted. "Ma'am, sir, I think you should see this," the guard called, snapping Sanaa out of her thoughts. They all crowded around the screen. The image was blurry, but it was unmistakable. A figure, tall and thin, walked beside Denial, guiding him. The figure's face was obscured, but there was something about the posture, something unnatural. The figure didn't look like someone who belonged in a hospital. "Who is this?" Imran demanded. "This is someone from outside, right?" The guard frowned. "We can't say for sure. It could be someone from another part of the building, but it's not one of our staff." Sanaa interrupted, her voice shaky. "Oh, we've checked," the guard said. "We don't recognize this person." Sanaa's pulse quickened. "Then who are they? Why are they taking my son?" But the questions only led to more uncertainty. The figure's face remained hidden, their identity unknown. As the footage came to an end, a creeping sense of dread washed over Sanaa. Whoever this person was, they were getting closer to Denial. And the more she tried to piece together the puzzle, the more she felt like she was missing something critical, something she couldn't see. Sanaa felt the walls closing in. What was happening? Why was her son taken? And more importantly, who would do something like this? The tension in the room was suffocating. Every second felt like a lifetime as the security guard continued to replay the footage over and over. But no matter how many times they watched it, the figure in the hallway remained just out of reach. Their face was always hidden in the shadows, their movements deliberate and controlled, as though they knew exactly where they were going. The more Sanaa stared at the screen, the more her gut twisted. Whoever it was, they were leading Denial somewhere, a place she couldn't see, a place she couldn't follow. Sanaa turned to Ahmed, her eyes wide with fear. What if they already took him outside? What if he's out there right now? Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper, but it felt like a scream in her chest. Ahmed gripped her shoulders tightly, trying to steady her. "We don't know that yet. We have to stay focused, stay calm. We're close. I can feel it." But Sanaa wasn't so sure anymore. The more they dug into the footage, the more they uncovered, the less it seemed like an accident or a simple misunderstanding. Whoever this person was, they didn't belong here. And that meant there was something more at play, something they couldn't yet understand. The guard cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the screen. "I've managed to pull up the access logs. There's one exit that wasn't fully monitored. One that leads to a side street behind the building." Sanaa's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying? Are you telling me?" "Yes," the guard continued, pointing to the screen. "It looks like the figure may have used that exit. If that's true, your son could be anywhere by now." Imran, who had been pacing at the back of the room, clenched his fists. We need to move. Now. Sanaa barely heard him. Her mind was too clouded with fear. Denial, her baby, was out there somewhere with someone who had taken him. She didn't even know if he was safe. Come on, let's go, Ahmed urged, pulling her gently toward the door. His grip was firm, but his eyes were frantic. He knew just as well as she did that time was running out. The hospital staff scrambled to assist, organizing a team of security guards to go search the grounds. But even as they rushed through the corridors and down stairwells, a chilling thought kept creeping into the back of Sanaa's mind. What if this was all part of something bigger? What if denial was only a piece in a much darker puzzle? As they reached the side exit, the air outside was cold and crisp, the wind biting at their skin. They split into two groups, with one heading toward the back alley and the other checking the parking lot. The moonlight was their only guide, casting long shadows across the pavement. Every corner felt like a potential hiding spot. Every whisper of wind felt like a warning. Where is he? Sanaa's voice cracked as she called Denial's name again and again. Her feet moving faster now as she ran down the alley, her heart racing in her chest. She had never felt this scared, this helpless. He's fine, Sanaa, Ahmed said, trying to sound reassuring, but even he could hear the strain in his voice. We're going to find him. Just stay with me. Sanaa nodded, but the fear in her eyes told a different story. She couldn't shake the image of the shadowy figure leading Denial into the unknown. Could they have taken him somewhere else? Was he being held against his will? Or worse, was he already over here? Imran's voice broke through her thoughts. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Imran was standing at the end of the alley, his face pale under the harsh streetlight. There's something you need to see. Sanaa and Ahmed rushed to his side, but when they saw what he was pointing to, they froze. A small, crumpled piece of fabric lay on the ground. It was bright yellow. Denial's favorite jacket. The one he had been wearing earlier when they arrived at the hospital. It was torn and stained with something dark, something that looked suspiciously like dirt, but... No, Sanaa gasped, her voice barely a whisper. She bent down, her knees hitting the cold ground as she reached for the jacket, clutching it in her trembling hands. No, no, no. Ahmed stepped forward, his expression hardening. This doesn't make sense, he muttered under his breath. His voice low but filled with anger. Who would do this? Who would hurt him? The jacket didn't answer him, but the question lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. As the group continued to search, the night grew darker, colder, the shadows stretching farther. The wind howled through the alley, carrying the scent of something old, something long forgotten. And then, just as hope seemed to be slipping through their fingers, a shout rang out from across the parking lot. I found something. One of the security guards yelled. Sanaa's heart skipped a beat. Without a word, she and Ahmed rushed toward the guard, desperate for any sign of denial. The guard was standing near an abandoned car, his flashlight flickering. It's a note, he said, his voice shaky as he held out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was in the back seat. Sanaa took the note from him, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she unfolded it. The words were written in bold, slanted handwriting. You're too late. He's mine now. And you'll never find him. Not unless you understand the truth. Sanaa's breath caught in her throat. Her knees buckled and she nearly fell, but Ahmed caught her, holding her steady. What does it mean? Imran asked, his voice low, a mixture of disbelief and fear. Sanaa couldn't speak. The words felt like a slap in the face, a message from someone who knew exactly how to toy with her heart. They were no longer just searching for a missing child. They were up against something far more sinister, something far more dangerous. But who was behind this? And what was the truth they needed to understand? The answers were just out of reach, and as the chilling words from the note echoed in her mind, one thing became painfully clear. The search for denial had just turned into something much darker than she could have ever imagined. Sanaa's hands trembled as she held the note, her mind racing to make sense of its cryptic message. The words taunted her, echoing in her head. You're too late. He's mine now. And you'll never find him. Not unless you understand the truth. What does it mean? Imran whispered, his voice tense with confusion. He reached for the note, but Sana recoiled, holding it close to her chest. I don't know, she whispered, her breath catching in her throat. But it's not just a note. It's a warning. Ahmed was silent, his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the empty parking lot. It was almost as if the world around them had gone still, waiting for the next move. They were in deeper than they had ever realized, and with each step forward, the path seemed to grow murkier. A cold shiver ran down Sana's spine as she looked around. The sense of dread in the air was almost suffocating, and the darkness of the night seemed to press in on them from all sides. She had never been so sure of anything in her life. Whoever had taken denial knew more than they were letting on, and they were playing a dangerous game. What's happening? She asked aloud, her voice barely above a whisper, but it seemed to carry in the empty lot. Why are they doing this? What do they want? Imran shook his head. I don't know, Sana. But we can't keep standing here. We need to keep looking, keep searching for him. Let's head back to the hospital and see if we can get more answers from security. Sana nodded, though the idea of returning to that cold, sterile place filled her with unease. She couldn't shake the image of the shadowy figure leading her son away, like a puppet master pulling the strings. But as they began walking back to the hospital, her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the message. Mom, I'm scared. I want to come home. Please help me. It was from Denial's phone. Sana's hands shook as she read the text again, and then again. It was unmistakably from her son. But how could it be? His phone had been left behind in his room when he vanished. She stared at the screen, her pulse racing. Ahmed, she gasped, her voice thick with disbelief. Denial, he texted me. Ahmed stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening. That doesn't make sense. His phone was at the hospital. How could he send a message? Before Sana could respond, another text popped up. This one was more chilling than the last. Don't trust anyone. The one you think is helping you is the one who is hurting you. Sana's breath caught in her throat. The words sent a jolt of cold fear through her veins. Who could possibly be sending these messages? And what did it mean? Imran was the first to speak, his voice tight. Sana, we need to talk to the police. This is too much for us to handle alone. Whoever is behind this, whatever this is, they're playing mind games with you. Sana nodded, but part of her resisted the idea. She had trusted the hospital, trusted the people who were supposed to help. But now she wasn't so sure. The more she thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. The figure in the footage, the note, Denial's messages. They were all connected, but to what? Then, as if in response to her thoughts, a sudden gut-wrenching noise echoed from behind them. A car engine revved loudly, followed by the screech of tires. Sana spun around just in time to see a dark SUV tearing down the street toward them, its headlights blinding in the night. The vehicle was speeding, headed directly for the hospital. Before she could react, the car screeched to a halt in front of them, kicking up gravel and dust. The driver's side window rolled down slowly, revealing a face she hadn't expected. Familiar face. It was Dr. Faison. He had been Denial's doctor, the same one who had treated him when they first arrived at the hospital. His expression was unreadable, his eyes darting nervously between the three of them. What are you doing here? Ahmed demanded, stepping forward, his voice low with suspicion. Dr. Faison glanced around quickly, his eyes narrowing. I need to talk to you. All of you. It's about Denial. There's something you need to know. Sana felt a chill run through her. She stepped closer, her voice shaky. What do you mean? What's going on? Why are you acting so strange? Dr. Faison didn't answer at first. Instead, he reached into the passenger seat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, carefully placing it into Sana's hands. Her breath caught when she saw what it was. It was Denial's stuffed bear, the one he carried with him everywhere. The bear she had tucked into his arms just hours earlier before they left the house. He had it with him when they took him, Dr. Faison said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know who did it, but I'm trying to help. I swear to you I am. Sanaa's heart pounded. There were too many questions, too many contradictions. Why was Dr. Faison suddenly involved? Why was he acting like he knew more than he should? Was he the one who had been sending the texts? How do you know so much about this? Imran asked, his voice sharp. And why are you giving us Denial's bear? What's going on? Dr. Faison looked around again, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously. There's something you don't understand. Something I didn't want you to know. But now I have no choice. His voice faltered for a moment. Then he continued. I was warned. They said if I didn't stay out of it, they'd hurt my family. But I couldn't just do nothing. You're looking for your son, but the truth is much darker than you realize. Your son, he's part of something bigger. Something none of us can control. The words hit like a blow to the chest. Sanaa's legs gave way, and she collapsed against the car, her mind racing as she tried to process what he was saying. What was he implying? What had her son gotten caught up in? Before she could ask him to explain, the SUV's engine revved again, and the car shot off into the night, disappearing around the corner. Sanaa's heart stopped. The bear was still clutched tightly in her hands, but the answers she needed were slipping further out of reach with every passing second. As the darkness swallowed the road ahead, the mystery deepened, and the stakes grew higher than she could have ever imagined. And still, Denial was out there, somewhere waiting for her to uncover the truth. Sanaa stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the sound of the SUV's tires screeching into the night echoed in her ears. Dr. Faison's cryptic words replayed in her mind. Your son. He's part of something bigger. What did he mean? How could Denial, her 3-year-old, be involved in something so dangerous? The questions weighed heavily on her, suffocating her with their intensity. Ahmed and Imran were silent, both of them clearly shaken by the turn of events. The stuffed bear in Sanaa's hands felt like a lifeline, something tangible in the sea of confusion that had consumed their lives in the past few hours. She looked at it again, the faded stitching on the bear's paw, the one Denial had always held when he was scared or upset. Now, it felt like a piece of him was still out there, waiting for her to figure out what had happened. Should we go to the police? Imran asked, his voice tight with urgency. This is getting out of hand. We need help. Sanaa shook her head. I don't think the police can help us anymore. Not after everything that's happened. Dr. Faison. He knows something. He's involved in this. But I don't know how. We need answers, Sanaa, Ahmed said, his voice soft but filled with determination. If we don't figure out what's going on, we might lose him forever. The words hit her like a cold wave, and for a moment everything went still. But the desperation in Ahmed's eyes, the fear in Imran's voice, and the weight of her son's disappearance kept her from breaking down. She couldn't give up. Not now. Not when Denial needed her more than ever. Sanaa took a deep breath. I'll go after him. I'll find him. With renewed resolve, they made their way back to the hospital, the path illuminated only by streetlights and the dim glow of security cameras that dotted the building's exterior. As they entered the lobby, it was eerily quiet. No nurses. No doctors. No sign of the chaos they had left behind hours ago. It was as if the entire hospital had disappeared into thin air. Sanaa's eyes darted to the hallway where Denial had last been seen. She could feel it in her gut. Something was waiting for her there. They made their way to the security office, where the footage had been reviewed earlier. The guard who had been assisting them was gone, replaced by another officer who didn't seem to have any clue about the situation. We need to see the surveillance footage, Ahmed said, his voice firm. The new guard hesitated, looking them over warily. I'm afraid I can't help you with that, he said, his tone flat. It's been locked down by higher authorities. Sanaa's pulse quickened. Higher authorities, she repeated, her voice rising. What do you mean? Why is it locked down? Before the guard could respond, a loud noise echoed from the back of the office, a door slamming open, followed by hurried footsteps. It was Dr. Faison. I told you, he said breathlessly, stepping into the room. I didn't want you to know this. But I can't keep it from you anymore. He took a deep breath, his eyes darting nervously between Sanaa, Ahmed, and Imran. They're not who you think they are. The people behind all of this, they're not just kidnappers. They're part of something far bigger. A network. Sanaa's heart skipped. What are you talking about? She demanded. What network? Who are they? Dr. Faison ran a hand through his hair, his expression filled with regret. It's a secret organization. They're not just after denial. They're after all the children with a special ability. Sanaa blinked, confused. What ability? Dr. Faison hesitated, then leaned in closer, lowering his voice. Denial has a gift. A rare ability that no one knew about until it was too late. He can read minds. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Read minds. Sanaa repeated, her voice shaky. It's true, Dr. Faison confirmed. It started when he was born, but no one noticed until recently. He's been unknowingly communicating with people telepathically. And now they're after him because of it. The organization, the ones who've taken him, they know about his ability, and they plan to use him for their own purposes. Sanaa couldn't process it. The room spun as she tried to understand. Her son, her innocent little boy, had this power, and now they were willing to go to any lengths to control him. Where is he? She asked desperately. Where did they take him? Dr. Faison's face tightened with guilt. They've been hiding in plain sight. A few of them are working within the hospital. Some are higher up. And denial. He's been targeted because of his abilities. Sanaa felt a cold wave wash over her. The hospital, the one place she thought was safe, had become part of the nightmare. The people she trusted, doctors, nurses, were working with these people, these kidnappers. And her son was the pawn in a game far beyond her understanding. I'm going to get him back, Sanaa said, her voice filled with a new strength. She wasn't going to let them win. Not after everything she'd been through. Not after everything denial had suffered. Wait, Dr. Faison said, grabbing her arm. There's one more thing. They've already left the hospital. They're on their way to a secluded location outside of the city. But it's too late for you to reach them. They know you're coming. Sanaa's heart sank. What do you mean? How do you know? Dr. Faison stepped back, his eyes filled with regret. Because I'm the one who told them you were looking for him. Sanaa's world shattered in that moment. The betrayal hit like a physical blow, and for a second she could hardly breathe. Dr. Faison, who had seemed so trustworthy, had been working against her the entire time. He was part of the network. Part of the people who had taken her son. Imran's eyes flashed with anger. You were working with them all along. Dr. Faison nodded. His shoulders slumped in defeat. I didn't have a choice. They threatened my family. But I couldn't let you go without warning you. Sanaa's mind was reeling. But there was no time to process the betrayal. Her son was out there, and she was the only one who could save him. I'll find him, she said, her voice cold and determined. And when I do, you'll regret ever crossing me. As the group left the hospital, the weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. They weren't just fighting for Denial's life anymore. They were fighting against a hidden world of dark secrets, manipulation, and power. The final confrontation was approaching, and the stakes were higher than ever before. But as they raced toward the location Dr. Faison had revealed, something even darker loomed ahead. The truth had only begun to unfold. The drive to the secluded location felt endless, each mile amplifying the tension that gnawed at Sanaa's chest. The night had grown colder, and with each passing minute, she felt a growing sense of urgency. Denial was out there, somewhere, waiting for her to find him. But the twisted truth she had just learned, about the hidden organization, the telepathic abilities, and Dr. Faison's betrayal, kept swirling in her mind. How could she ever have trusted him? And worse, how could her son, her precious boy, be tangled in something so sinister? Imran, who had been silent for the most part, glanced over at her with a mixture of concern and resolve. "We're getting closer, Sana. We can do this." She nodded, though doubt crept into her heart. But she couldn't afford to show weakness now. Her son needed her. They all did. There was no turning back. The car finally pulled up to a rundown house, its silhouette barely visible in the darkness. The area seemed deserted, with no lights or signs of life. It felt like the kind of place where secrets festered, where people disappeared, never to be heard from again. Sanaa's stomach churned as they got out of the car, the gravel crunching under their feet. "This is it," Ahmed said quietly, his hand resting on the door of the car, eyes scanning the area. "Stay close. We don't know what's waiting for us inside." Sanaa didn't need any more words. Her legs were already moving, propelled by the need to find Denial, to make sure he was safe. They approached the front door, which hung slightly ajar, as though someone had just hurriedly entered and left. The tension was suffocating, every shadow seeming like a potential threat. Sanaa pushed the door open with a creak, her heart racing. The inside was dark and empty, save for a few scattered belongings that looked hastily abandoned. It didn't take long before they heard voices from the other side of the house. Sanaa motioned for them to be quiet as they crept forward, careful not to make a sound. As they reached a small room at the back of the house, Sanaa's breath caught in her throat. There, sitting in the middle of the room, was Denial. He looked so small, so vulnerable, sitting in a chair with his head drooped forward, his hands resting in his lap. His stuffed bear was still clutched tightly in his arms, the one item that had always brought him comfort. But there was something different about him now. His usually bright eyes were dull, distant, and he didn't seem to notice them approaching. "Denial." Sanaa's voice broke the silence, and the boy's head jerked up. For a moment, his eyes locked with hers, but they weren't the same eyes she remembered. There was a coldness in them now, an emptiness that made her heart drop. He didn't seem to recognize her. "Sanaa, it's me," she said, her voice trembling. "It's Mommy. I'm here to take you home." Denial blinked, but his expression remained blank. He didn't speak. Instead, his gaze drifted to the door behind her, where two figures emerged from the shadows. Dr. Faison stepped forward, his face shadowed in the dim light. His expression was grim, and there was no sign of the guilt or regret he had shown before. His eyes were hard, calculating. "You've come to rescue him, haven't you?" he said, his voice almost mocking. "But you're too late." Sanaa's heart sank. "What have you done to him?" "The same thing I've done to all of them," Dr. Faison replied coldly. "I've awakened his abilities. He's not the innocent child you remember. He's part of something far greater now." Sanaa's mind reeled. "Oh, this isn't him. This can't be true." Dr. Faison's lips curled into a smile. "Oh, but it is. You see, once their abilities are awakened, they become part of the collective. They no longer belong to themselves. They belong to us." The air felt thick with tension, but before anyone could respond, Denial's voice, soft and distant, spoke. "They want me, Mommy. They'll never let me go." Sanaa's heart shattered as she stepped closer to him. "Denial, no. You're my son. I will never let them have you." But it wasn't the same boy who had once called her Mommy with so much love. This was someone different, someone who had been changed by the force that now controlled him. The truth hit her like a punch in the gut. Dr. Faison and the organization had turned Denial into a tool, a weapon, for their own dark purpose. Sanaa could feel the tears welling in her eyes, but she pushed them back. She wasn't going to lose him. Not like this. She turned to Imran and Ahmed, who had been standing in the doorway, their faces filled with disbelief. "We need to act now. We can't let him become one of them." Dr. Faison raised a hand, his eyes glinting. "You're too late. You have no idea what you're dealing with." But as he spoke, something unexpected happened. Denial, her little boy, stirred, his eyes flickering back to life. The coldness that had overtaken them began to fade, replaced by the warmth and recognition she had been longing for. "Mommy," Denial whispered, his voice breaking, and he reached out for her. Sanaa rushed to him, pulling him into her arms, holding him tight. For a moment the world seemed to stop. Denial was back. Her son was back. She didn't care what had happened, what forces had tried to control him. She had him. And that was all that mattered. But just as quickly as he had returned to her, there was a loud noise, like a crackling wave of energy, and suddenly Dr. Faison stumbled back, a look of shock and fear on his face. Denial, in that moment, revealed the true extent of his power. He had broken free. The telepathic hold that had been on him shattered in an instant, and for the first time, Denial seemed truly himself. "Leave us alone." Denial's voice rang out, filled with strength and clarity, the power in his words sending a shudder through the room. The force that had once controlled him now recoiled, as if it had met its match. Sanaa didn't waste another second. She grabbed Denial's hand and ran, pulling him out of the room, with Imran and Ahmed right behind them. Dr. Faison's voice echoed behind them, but Sanaa didn't look back. The betrayal, the pain, it was all in the past now. Denial was free. By the time they reached the car and drove away, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Denial, the child she thought she had lost, was with her again. No longer a prisoner of an organization bent on exploiting his gift. And as they drove into the night, Sanaa looked at her son. He was still so young, so innocent, but now he was different. His eyes held a quiet strength, a resilience that would help him face the world. It had been a long, harrowing journey, but it was over. And though the road ahead would not be easy, Sanaa knew one thing for sure. She would never stop fighting for her son.